Oh, you all having some fun? Yeah, Nashville. You bet. Well, I just ran into Kevin Harrington backstage, and he's pacing the floor. Cannot wait to get out here. He is an amazing man, and he will be judging the pitches that we have after lunch. We've got some Corky's barbecue back there, which will be fantastic. But our next speaker is going to speak about digital development. If you could please welcome a guy who's been a big part of putting this together today, co-founder of Pilgrim Consulting, Mark MacGarity. Come on out, mate.
Good morning, everyone. We enjoying it so far? Excellent. So I'm curious, do we have any tinkerers in the room? There got to be more than that. So as a kid, I was a tinkerer, and probably even to this day, although I don't nearly have the time as I used to. And I would be the kid that would always be taking things apart. I'd get a perfectly good radio, tear it apart, figure out, okay, how is this working? What are the pieces? What does this thing do? Oh, this is great. This is fantastic. And pull it all apart. And of course, I would put it back together. And then, I was always absolutely fascinated at how many extra parts they put in this stuff. I mean, I have a little pile of screws and nuts and bolts, and I was like, this is useless. Nobody needs this garbage. Yeah, my mom did not find it nearly as fascinating, and especially when she had to go to the store and buy a new radio or a new hair dryer or a car. It's all in the past. It's all in the past. She reminds me regularly. But whether it was computers or it was software or businesses or ray guns, the desire to create has always been present in my life. The ray gun's still in development. It'll get there, I'm pretty sure. So Pilgrim Consulting started nearly 16 years ago with a pilgrimage, as you may have expected. And it started here in the U.S., and then went to St. Petersburg, Russia, and ultimately ended in Ukraine. And it was driven by a passion for technology as well as a heart for distressed children. And we still have that same heart for today. And then guides a lot of the things that we do. So, that passion, like I said, is still present in our work to this day. It's present in the work that we do with companies that have the same desire to build and to create things. And today we do it in the digital realm with software, web apps, mobile apps, even games, which are a lot of fun. And but these companies often struggle with taking their vision from paper to reality. And in the digital space, that can be particularly difficult. So let's talk a little bit about the journey of an unrealized idea. And a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about, there's a lot of parallels with the other types of businesses, whether it's physical products or digital products. A lot of the themes are still the same. However, with digital, there are quite a few differences. But let's talk a little bit about the struggles. I don't know how many people have been on the struggle bus before. It's a fun one. And but startups can often run pretty lean on experience, often skill, resources, and perspective when it comes to digital products. And they often struggle to bring their product from, or build a product that not only matches their vision for what they're hoping it to eventually become, but they often struggle to get it truly aligned to what their customers' needs are. So I don't know how many startups that are like this, but many startups hit the ground running, and they want to build a fully realized product. They have their grand vision. They're like, okay, I'm going to go out, I'm going to build this big giant system. It's going to be awesome. But they do it without enough validation or feedback to know whether or not they're on the right track. Happens many times. Maybe some people in this room are there right now. I've been there many times in my career. It happens. You get this grand vision, you're like, you got to do it. However, this chaos often leads to the inability to really realize a clear direction for your product or even an identity for your company, especially if the product is your company. So, what is the result of this? Take a look.
We believe in the power of iteration. We originally started off as StumbleMonkey, which was like Airbnb but for online dating. So when you left town, you could rent out your spouse or partner. Great idea, but we found out it was illegal. So then we had to pivot.
Pivot. It's important to pivot, yeah.
We changed our name to Gagagupta, that's with 6 R's, and that app was like Spotify meets Grindr, but for rental cars, but run as if it were for a hotel.
And then from there we pivoted again and formed FlipSpot. That was like Instapaper meets Kickstarter and a little bit like Quora but without the questions. And we took your credit card payments and made them animated GIFs.
Every startup can tell you how much you learned from failure. And if you look at how much we've failed, that's where you can see how smart we've become.
Pure brilliance, right? You know, it's a joke, but it's actually pretty close to reality in a lot of cases. And I think what I learned most from this is that we don't have nearly enough R's in our name, you know, paparilgum, you know. But anyways, you know, I think most of us know the poem by Robert Frost, where he talks about 2 roads that diverge in the wood. And of course, he took the one less traveled. So let's talk a little bit about what could happen if we take Frost's advice with software development. It is true, the road less traveled basically has unlimited potential. Then again, so does my professional basketball career. I still have high hopes. And, but, you know, this road is actually marked by uncertainty and unpredictable roadblocks that can be very costly, especially in a startup mode. So, you know, there have been those that have been successful on this, and, you know, most people know those names. They're the outlandish ideas that took an odd approach to things, and huge success. But those are typically very few and very far between. You know, you can't place a value on something that is completely unknown and unseen. Words cannot replace seeing and interacting with your product. And launching without customer feedback is honestly an educated guess at best. And it can also be a very costly approach as you invest in a full project build without any product validation or customer feedback. So let's talk a little bit about the road you should travel when it comes to software development and creating your digital products, taking your ideas to in the digital realm to life. So at Pilgrim, we have a program that we call D3, and it basically stands for Discover, Develop, and Deliver. And what we focus on before we ever do anything, when we first sit down, is we talk about the what and the why. Those two are not inseparable. Focusing only on the what is a risky business. Adding the why to that gives the validation, gives the reasoning, and actually can drive the overall project. So, you know, taking that concept, like we said, off paper and providing a way for both investors and customers to see and interact with the product and create that visual representation of your product that can be tested, that can be refined, and then actually ultimately validated. Of course, I'm talking about a prototype. You know, we talked about prototypes in the physical realm. Well, prototypes are really no different in the digital space, and it's something that we believe in very, very wholeheartedly at Pilgrim. And a prototype can simply be a graphical representation, something we call a clickable prototype, you know, where you can visually see, you can interact, you can feel it, you can touch it, and it can go all the way to a simple build of your product. It could be the prototype. And there's advantages to each, and then there's different applications for each, if I could say it. So a prototype is one of the best ways you turn your idea into a physical representation that you can feel and touch. And it allows you to refine your thoughts around your product based upon validation before you ever write even a single line of code. And this is important because it allows you to focus on, honestly, in my opinion, one of the most important things about software development, which is the user experience. User experience is paramount. If users can't use your product or they don't know how to use your product, then you're basically setting yourself in failure at the very beginning. So in the prototyping phase, you can basically focus on the user experience, refine that, get it right, get validation of that, then you start building your product. And that will actually drive the actual development of your product. So in your prototype, it's important to be very visually engaging. You know, it allows you to demonstrate how your product will look on a range of devices. Mobile phones, desktops, 20-year-old computer screens, whoever your end target is, you got to know what they're going to be looking at and how it's going to interact and how it's going to be used. And then it gives you the ability to refine your design without slowing the development or actually completely derailing it. If you're halfway through your project and you realize that this user experience is completely wrong, sometimes you have to go back multiple steps to fix that and then start back from there or completely start over. Very important to get that right from the onset. And of course, it's very cost effective. Compared to a full project build, a prototype is minimal. And you can use the assets and the pieces from that to actually build moving forward. So it's very cost effective. Ultimately, it will save you on the full project build as well because you know exactly what you're building. And so from prototyping, then we go into the MVP, which we've talked a lot about MVPs. I think a lot of people understand that process, and I'm sure a lot of people have seen this image before. It is one of the best I've ever seen as far as how not to and how to build an MVP. So if I'm building a method of transportation, an easier method of transportation, my MVP should not be just a wheel. Honestly, to achieve that goal, it's completely useless. Yes, it's a part of the whole picture, but if I'm giving people a wheel and hoping that to improve their transportation, they're going to look at me like I'm an idiot, because I probably am. So, what I should be doing instead is give them the skateboard. Yes, it's very simple, but it accomplishes the goal. It gives them an ability to improve their transportation. And then each iteration improves on that based upon your customer feedback. And so, maybe your customers say, I'm tired of falling on my butt all the time on this stupid skateboard. Can you please give me a handle? There you go, iteration number 2 of your MVP. And that keeps progressing until you get into your fully realized product. So paring down your MVP is very important. What we always suggest is to focus on your core features, and then you can iterate from there. So focus on the very core central piece of your software, of your device, of your app, and then build it out from there. So simplicity while retaining functionality is absolutely key here. And then feedback, even through the MVP process. As a matter of fact, it becomes even more critical at this point. You want to test and refine in an ideal environment. And let me explain that a little bit. So let's say that you're building a piece of software to help engineers on a product, workers on a product line to help them process their orders quickly. Get them off of paper, and we see this a lot, especially in that industry. People are shuffling paper around. You want to get them off of paper and get them into the digital space. Awesome. Instead of taking your product and putting it in an office and figuring, okay, yeah, this is great, the bugs, no bugs, it's great, it's perfect. What happens when you take that into the real environment? Well, you put it on the line, and you got a guy shuffling through product fast, and he's trying to interact with this. Well, if your user interface doesn't apply to that scenario, he's hitting the wrong buttons, things are in the wrong places, and then before you know it, the project fails and the adoption is gone because they can't operate in that type of environment. So it's very important to put your product in an ideal environment, not in a vacuum, and then make it as easy as possible for users to give feedback, ideally within the product itself. That is by far one of the best ways to do it. And then with customer retention, your MVP should be valuable enough to stand on its own. And also retain the first crop of customers, the early adopters that you get onto the platform. And then move to the next version of your product based upon their feedback. So they're giving you feedback as they're using it. It's that iterative process that we talk about where you're getting feedback, you're improving, you're getting feedback, you're improving over and over and over again. And what this does, it gives you a solid user base going into your full launch, and more importantly, you have product evangelists that you can point to and say, hey, these guys are using it, it's fantastic, here's their story. So I'm going to tell you a little story about the $2.8 billion robot Sidekick. Everybody loves robots. So Robot Sidekick was actually an internal product. It had been used for quite some time within this company. But they decided to launch it externally and create the MVP. And so basically they ran with it in order to get validation. So they launched in March of 2013 with their MVP. They convinced about 6 to 10 companies to try it and give them early feedback. It was a small enough number to where it was controllable, large enough number where they could get a range of different types of companies using their product and get the right kind of feedback they needed in the right types of environments. So they learned early on that as the teams scaled, as they grew, that the way that the product was being used was drastically different. The scaling drastically affected the functionality within the platform. You know, the larger the team, the product literally reshaped before their eyes. You know, features that they saw as absolutely critical, the customers said, this is worthless. We don't need it. It doesn't work right. And then things that they thought would never be included in the platform, they ended up having to put in there because the users demanded it. In order for adoption to take place, they had to include them in there. A feedback process, very important. You know, Robot Sidekick was, you know, basically stuck with this process of scaling to larger teams within companies that tried the product. You know, so they would start with a few team members, and then they would go to a department, and then they go to the whole company, and keep growing over and over and over from there. And they kept repeating this process continually. And then almost 6 months later, in August of that year, they launched to the public. They decided not to call it a beta because they were afraid that that would give it a connotation of being unpolished, unfinished. So they dropped the beta, said, here's our product. Well, the result of that was that on day one, they signed up 8,000 users. Within 2 weeks, that had gone to 15,000, which is a pretty decent start. I take it. So who is that robot sidekick today? Some of you probably have already figured it out. That would be Slack. So anybody that knows us at Pilgrim knows that we love Slack. It is such a fantastic product, team collaboration tool. Has saved us many, many times, not only with communications within our teams, but communications with our customers. Great tool. We use it religiously. So Slack is actually now valued at over $1 billion, which is a pretty decent valuation for the amount of time they've been around. They've raised over $340 million in venture capital. They have over 2.3 million daily active users. 675,000 of them are paying, which is huge. That is hugely substantial. And the amazing thing is that they actually did this with no CMO, no chief marketing officer. There was no giant marketing plan where they brought in outside consultants. Okay, how are we going to market this? What are we going to do? How are we going to bring this to market? And then no big ad spend. Basically what they did was they leveraged their existing relationships and then old-fashioned PR to get the word out. And it was a huge success. So some of the lessons learned from my experience with software over the years is that, number one, stick with the MVP as long as you can. It allows for flexibility in the development process, allows you to quickly make changes and iterate over and over again. As long as you're in that mode and you're not stuck, you can do that. And don't feel like your customers won't be interested unless they have every possible bell and whistle that you have in your head. As a matter of fact, a lot of those bells and whistles may be things that they don't even care about. And without that validation, you may not even know that. So spending the extra time to put those in there without ever even validating them is often useless. So stick with the MVP as long as you can. Obviously know your customer. It seems like it is a no-brainer, but it is absolutely critical in software because software is such a finicky thing. It requires a lot of change management pieces to it, especially if you're revolutionizing the way that something is done. You know, Slack actually made customer feedback the driving force of their product development efforts. And they put it in their product. They make it a priority. They monitor Twitter and Facebook and every single channel regularly. They respond to things. If the feature is mentioned a certain number of times, they'll actually put it in the process cycle to actually include it in development. And that, honestly, I think that's one of the biggest reasons why they've been so successful, because they listen to their users and they know their customers. Prioritize what you're building early on and focus on your customer. So know all their pain points that your customer has and that you're trying to solve, and be able to explain it back to them is very important. Have that communication piece. And understand how your customer is using your product. It seems fairly self-explanatory, but over and over and over again, over the years of doing software, we build a product, we put it out there, people start using it, and they start using it in a way that we completely did not intend. It's like, why? I don't understand. Okay, And so knowing how they're using it will actually tell a lot about how your customers, or what your customers actually need and want. Or maybe there's a change management piece within your software that needs to happen. Very important to know how they're using it. The great thing about this in the digital realm, outside of regular product development or physical product development, is the tools available today are unbelievable for doing this. There's SDKs and systems available not only for basic analytics, but you can literally watch how people are using your application, whether it's mobile, web, or otherwise. There's even a product that allows you to physically turn their camera on and watch their face as they're using your product. A little creepy, but you know, I would disclose before you do that. But in some cases, that's actually good because you want to get an emotion. You want to see what they're looking at. You know, they did this, and they're like, what? You know, get those impressions. Honestly, it's invaluable. And in the digital realm, it allows you to do that because of the flexibility and the power and the tools behind that. And don't just show early adopters how to use your product. And in a way of minimizing risk with your development project, you know, you want to empower them through product training and education. You know, Slack actually built resources for both users and for team admins, because team admins actually had to sell it to their teams. It's a team tool. One person is not going to be the only one using it. So Slack actually provided a lot of these resources to help facilitate that process and increase adoption that way. And then anticipate questions and have resources ready to answer those questions when they come. So, if you're at a place in your digital development where you have your idea, you're ready to take that step into prototyping, you're ready to start the iterative process of creating, validating, changing, improving, and then ultimately leading to the MVP of your product, then we should talk. So I would encourage you to go to pilgrimconsulting.com/IDEACON, and you can learn a little bit more about Pilgrim's process and how we do prototyping, how we do MVPs, and you can actually apply to be a part of our D3 program and walk through that with us. And that's it for me.
All right.